The air on Meridian, the capital city of the garden world Xylos, tasted of engineered perfection. It carried the scent of nectar from the ever-blooming lumina flowers that lined the grand promenades and the clean, metallic tang of the silent mag trains that glided between towers of living crystal. For 200 years, Xylos had known nothing but this sterile peace, a tranquility curated and guaranteed by the vast, benevolent stewardship that governed this arm of the galaxy. Tonight, the city was celebrating the bicentennial of the Accord of Serenity, the treaty that had ended the last of the Rimward conflicts and ushered in an age of placid prosperity. It was a peace, the official history stated, made possible by difficult choices, by the sad but necessary containment of unstable elements that threatened the delicate galactic ecosystem. Chief among these contained elements relegated to a forgotten footnote in the grand historical archives was a volatile little world called Earth. The broadcasts across the city showed joyful Xylan families, their three-fingered hands raised in salute to the floating effigies of the Accord's architects. The children, with their large, liquid black eyes, had never known fear, never felt hunger, never heard a scream that wasn't born of delight. They were the inheritors of a perfect universe, a universe that had wisely pruned its most diseased branches long ago, and so none of them noticed the ghost that slipped into their system. A vessel that moved with the silence of a forgotten memory. It was named the Mnemosyne, a sliver of a ship painted in a null black that drank light, invaded all but the most dedicated scans. It didn't tear through subspace, it drifted in on the solar winds, a piece of cosmic debris with a cold, calculating heart. Inside the Mnemosyne, there was no celebration. The air tasted of recycled oxygen, ozone, and the faint, bitter aroma of grief. There were only 4 figures on the bridge, shadows against the soft glow of their consoles. At the center stood Elias Vance, his title not captain or commander, but archivist. He was a man built from wreckage, his face a roadmap of a history the galaxy had tried to erase. A long, thin scar cut from his temple to his jaw, a relic from the final days in the subterranean bunkers of what was once called Geneva. He had been a child then, small enough to be bundled onto one of the last desperate seed ships. A final, screaming prayer hurled into the void. He watched the feeds from Meridian, the laughing children, the gleaming towers, and his gray eyes held a stillness that was more terrifying than any rage. "They look so happy," whispered Lena Petrova, the ship's mimeticist, her fingers dancing over a holographic interface that swirled with lines of psychic code and emotional resonance patterns. "They've had 2 centuries to practice." Elias's voice was low, a gravelly echo from a ruined world. "Their happiness is a monument built on a mass grave. It's time to show them the foundation." The other 2 crew members were silent. There was Jorich, a Xylan defector, a former stewardship historian whose conscience had outweighed his comfort. He had discovered the unfiltered records of Earth's collapse, the quarantine distress calls, the clinical reports cataloging a planetary extinction event with the detachment of a botanist observing a dying plant. Now he sat at the navigation console, his face a mask of grim determination, guiding them through the sensor nets of his own people. The 4th was only ever called Silas. He was more machine than man, his body a framework of humming servitors and optical sensors, a survivor of the orbital defense platforms that had rained fire on each other in Earth's final, insane moments. He was the ship's ghost, the one who could slip through any firewall, bend any data stream to his will. He didn't speak. He simply acted, his consciousness a silent, vengeful current flowing through the ship's systems. "Silas, begin the injection," Elias commanded. Phase 1. Start with the Dreamers. On the planet below, the celebrations began to wind down. In their sterile, comfortable homes, the citizens of Meridian settled into their sleep cycles. And that is when the haunting began. It was not a nightmare, not in the traditional sense. It was a whisper, a flicker at the edge of consciousness. A Xylan bureaucrat, dreaming of his upcoming promotion, suddenly felt a pang of hunger so sharp, so gnawingly real, that it woke him in a cold sweat. A child, nestled in the safety of her parents' embrace, saw a flash of a sky the color of blood and rust and felt a tremor that shook her bones. Not her bed. A poet, celebrated for her verses on the beauty of celestial harmony, was jolted awake by the phantom sensation of dust filling her lungs, the taste of ash on her tongue. It was subtle at first, easily dismissed as indigestion, as stress, as nothing at all. But across the city, then the continent, then the world, millions woke with a lingering, inexplicable sadness, a ghost of a feeling they could not name. Aboard the Menemozini, Lena monitored the city's collective emotional state. "It's working," she murmured, her eyes wide. Their subconscious is accepting the initial mimetic seeds. The emotional resonance is dissonant. They're feeling grief without a source. Confusion is spreading like a low-grade fever. Elias watched, his expression unchanged. "Good. Yorick, prepare the historical archives. Silas, I want you to find every public terminal, every educational institute, every museum display. We're going to give them a history lesson." The next day, the unease that had started in the night began to bleed into the waking world. During the morning's news broadcast, a report on agricultural yields was interrupted by a single frame of a starving child, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes hollow. It was gone in an instant, so fast that most viewers thought they had imagined it. In a primary school, a lesson on the peaceful philosophies of the stewardship was displayed on a smartboard. But for a moment, the text warped, replaced by a desperate, garbled plea, "Is anyone out there? We are under bombardment from our own. The sky is falling. Please." The teacher rebooted the system, blaming a glitch. But the children had seen it. They had felt a flicker of the terror behind the words. Panic did not erupt. The society of Xylos was too ordered, too logical for that. But a crack had appeared in their perfect reality. Officials blamed solar flares, a minor data corruption from a faulty satellite. Prefect Valerius, the planetary governor, a tall, elegant Xylan known for his unshakable composure, delivered a calming address. He assured the populace that these minor technical difficulties were being investigated and that there was no cause for alarm. He spoke of stability, of the strength of their shared peace. He used words like inconsequential anomalies and network maintenance. He was a man trying to patch a crack in a dam with a piece of paper. On the Menemozin, Elias listened to the prefect's speech. "He still thinks it's a machine that's broken," he said, a flicker of something almost like pity in his eyes. "He doesn't understand. We're not here to break their machines. We're here to break their hearts." He turned to Lena. Phase 2. Make it personal. This time, the weapon was more refined. It wasn't just a fleeting image or a distorted text. Silas, with Jorik guiding him through the labyrinthine Xylan social networks, targeted individuals, a celebrated architect overseeing the construction of a new peace monument, suddenly experienced a vivid, waking hallucination. He was no longer in his pristine office, but in a cramped, stinking bunker. He could smell the sweat and fear of the 100 people crammed in with him. He could hear the muffled thud of explosions from above, the terrified whimpers of a child clinging to his leg, a child that wasn't his. The experience lasted only 10 seconds, but it left him shaking, gasping for air in his perfectly climate-controlled room. A renowned musician composing a symphony to celebrate the bicentennial found her fingers freezing over her instrument. In her mind, she heard a different sound, the piercing shriek of an orbital defense laser, a sound of such apocalyptic finality that it drowned out all music. She collapsed, weeping, unable to explain the source of her sudden, overwhelming despair. The phenomenon spread. It was no longer ignorable. The glitches became episodes. The anomalies became the grieving sickness. People on the street would suddenly stop, their eyes wide with a terror that wasn't their own, clutching their chests as if feeling the phantom pain of a shrapnel wound from a war that had never touched their world. They were experiencing Earth's death throes, not as a story, but as a personal, sensory memory. The carefully constructed serenity of Xylos began to shatter. For the first time, Xylans began to ask questions. They delved into their own historical archives, searching for the source of these images, these feelings. But the official records were sanitized, mentioning Earth only as a pre-accord quarantine zone that had succumbed to internal aggression. The details were sealed, classified under stewardship edicts for maintaining galactic stability. But Jorik had given Silas the key. Deep within the subarchives, behind layers of encryption, lay the truth. And Silas opened the floodgates. Unfiltered data streams. Raw, terrifying footage from Earth's final days began to leak onto public networks. News channels that were supposed to be showing market reports were hijacked, instead broadcasting the desperate last-stand speeches of forgotten leaders, the grainy footage of cities turning to glass, the audio logs of pilots screaming as their ships were torn apart. The stewardship's sensors fought back, but it was like trying to catch smoke. For every feed they shut down, Silas opened 10 more. The truth was out, and with it, a horrifying realization began to dawn upon the people of Xylos. Their peace, their prosperity, their entire way of life had been purchased with the currency of silent, willful ignorance. They had been living in a beautiful house, deliberately ignoring the screams coming from the basement. Prefect Valerius watched his world unravel from the governor's spire. The reports were no longer about glitches. They were about riots. Not violent riots, but riots of grief and confusion. His people were weeping in the streets, holding each other, haunted by the ghosts of a people they had never met. His composure finally cracked. This wasn't a technological attack. He understood that now. It wasn't a military invasion. It was a moral one. It was an assault on their very identity. "Find them," he ordered his chief of security, his voice a strained whisper. "Whoever is doing this, I don't care how. Scour the system. I want them found." But it was too late. The final phase of the incursion was about to begin. Aboard the Mnemosyne, Elias stood on the bridge, the glow of the planet below reflected in his eyes. "They know the what," he said. "Now they need to know the why, and the who." He looked at his crew, his small band of ghosts. It's time they saw a human face. The grand plaza in the heart of Meridian was filled with a terrified, bewildered crowd. All the bicentennial decorations, the banners of peace and prosperity, now seemed like a grotesque mockery. Every screen in the plaza, from the towering spire sides to the small personal communicators in people's hands, had been seized. There was no more chaotic footage, no more screams. There was only silence, and a single, unmoving image, the scarred face of Elias Vance. He was not angry. He was not threatening. His expression was one of profound, ancient sorrow. When he spoke, his voice was not amplified by technology, but carried by it, an intimate, heartbreaking whisper that every soul on the planet could hear in their own mind. "We were told you were peaceful," he began, his voice calm, but heavy with the weight of generations of pain. "We were told you were wise. We sent you our poems, our music, our science. We sent you our questions. When the famines came, we begged you for food. When the wars started, we screamed for intervention. We showed you our children, starving in the dust. And your stewardship classified us as an acceptable loss. You placed a cordon around our sun and called it a quarantine. You watched our skies burn and you recorded it for your archives. You did not pull the trigger, but you handed us the gun and locked the door." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle upon a civilization that had never known such an indictment. "We are the children of the world you abandoned. We are the ghosts from your footnote. We have not come to burn your cities. We have not come to conquer you. We have come to give you a gift. We have come to give you our memory. We want you to feel what we felt. We want you to live with the truth. Your 200 years of serenity were built upon our billion graves. Was it worth it?" As he finished, the memory plague reached its crescendo. It was no longer a flicker or a whisper. For one horrifying minute, every living being on Xylos experienced the final, collective moments of Earth, the blinding flash of the last bombs, the crushing despair of the final bunker, the deafening silence as a world's heart stopped beating. It was a psychic scream that echoed across the planet, a shared trauma that would forever be seared into the consciousness of every Zelan. In the governor's spire, Prefect Valerius collapsed to his knees, clutching his head, his own screams joining the symphony of a world-shattered innocence. The screens went blank. The psychic assault ceased. But the silence that followed was more profound, more terrible than the scream it replaced. In the cold, dark space above the planet, the Mnemosyne turned, its engines burning cold and silent, and slipped back into the void, leaving behind a world that was physically untouched, but psychologically and spiritually broken forever. Their mission here was done. The first crack in the stewardship's perfect peace had been made, not with a torpedo, but with the truth. And Elias Vance knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had a great many sins to remember. The silence left behind on Xylos was a living thing, a cancerous void where a society's soul had been. The grieving sickness, as it was now known, did not fade. It festered. The shared, injected memory of Earth's death became a cultural inheritance, A trauma passed from parent to child in a glance, a shudder, a sudden, inexplicable sob. Xylans stopped working. The mag trains sat idle in their crystalline tubes. The lumina flowers wilted from neglect, their engineered nectar turning sour. Citizens would wander the grand promenades, not in protest, but in a daze, their large black eyes staring at the sky as if expecting it to turn to fire. They were haunted. They would flinch at loud noises, hoard food despite their automated abundance, and wake screaming from dreams of falling cities they had never seen. The stewardship's response was not one of compassion, but of containment. Xylos was declared a biohazard zone level 7, not for a virus of the body, but for one of the mind. A blockade of sterile white Purifier-class cruisers formed a perimeter around the system, a picket fence to keep the madness in. On the surface, a new authority arrived. They were not doctors or counselors. They were inquisitors from the Office of Ideological Hygiene, and their leader was a woman named Kaylin. She was tall and severe, her features as sharp and precise as a surgical instrument. She did not see a populace in pain. She saw a dataset corrupted by a hostile memetic intrusion. Her mission was to restore order by erasing the anomaly. Her methods were quiet, and they were monstrous. Teams of her purifiers, clad in polished silver armor that reflected no light, moved through the cities. They did not carry blasters. They carried neurolamps that pulsed with a soft, hypnotic blue light. They would find the catatonic, the weeping, the grief-stricken, and they would repattern them. The process was painless. The subjects would simply go still, their eyes glazing over, and when they awoke, the haunting was gone. So was everything else. They became placid, smiling shells, their memories of the past week and the ghost memories of Earth wiped clean, replaced by a deep, unwavering sense of contentment. They were ghosts of a different sort, happy ghosts in a world that had forgotten why it had screamed. Kaylin watched the process from her command center in the governor's spire, her face impassive. The contagion is memory, she dictated into her log, her voice a calm, chilling monotone. The cure, therefore, is forgetting. We have isolated the source signature, a single, antiquated vessel of pre-Accord Terran design. It is a primitive, emotional weapon. Find it. Sterilize it. Erase it from all records. Earth died once. It will not be allowed a second life as a ghost. Far away, in the cold anonymity of the interstellar void, the crew of the Mnemosyne lived with the echoes of what they had done. The bridge was thick with a tension that had not been there before. Jorix, the Xylan defector, had not slept in 3 days. He would sit at the navigation console, replaying the data feeds from his homeworld, watching the faces of his people contort with a pain he had helped inflict. "We broke them. Elias," he finally said, his voice raw. "We didn't liberate them. We didn't enlighten them. We drove them mad. What Kaylin is doing to them now, this repatterning, it's a lobotomy on a planetary scale. Is this the justice you wanted?" Elias stood before the forward viewport, watching the star-strewn darkness. Justice is a concept for courts and philosophers. Jorix, we're delivering consequences. They built their utopia on a lie. We simply showed them the receipt. What the stewardship does to hide the truth is on them, not us. We are not the disease. We are the symptom. And Lena, Jorix shot back, his voice rising. Is she just a symptom, too? In the corner of the bridge, Lena Petrova was curled in her chair, a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her body trembling slightly. She had been the conduit for the psychic assault, the lens that focused a billion dying screams into a single, weaponized thought. Now, the residue clung to her. She would murmur in her sleep, seeing flashes of the children in the Geneva bunker, feeling the phantom burn of plasma fire on her skin. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her pale face and the dark circles under her eyes said otherwise. "It's a small price. I can carry their pain. What I can't carry is the thought of them forgetting it." Elias turned, his gray eyes softening for a moment as he looked at her, then hardening as he faced Yorick. "Every war has a cost. Our ancestors paid with their blood and their world. We pay with pieces of our soul. It is a price I am willing to pay. And one I thought you were, too." Before Yorick could answer, the silent form of Silas glided into the center of the bridge. A holographic display shimmered into existence above his metallic chassis. It was a star chart, but at its center was a gleaming, moon-sized structure. "This is Viridia," Elias said, his voice now devoid of emotion, all business. "The stewardship's central archive. It is more than a library. It is their truth factory. Every historical record, every cultural document, every piece of information that flows through the 60 sectors of their territory is processed, sanitized, and stored there. It is the heart of their lie. Xylos was a message. Viridia will be the erasure." Yorick stared at the hologram, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by awe and terror. "Viridia is a fortress. It's defended by 3 sector fleets and its own internal legion of purifiers. Its firewalls are woven from quantum algorithms. It's not a target, Elias. It's a suicide note, which is why we will not attack it," Elias replied calmly. "We will infect it. Silas has found a vulnerability, a back door left by the original architects, the ones who were later retired when their work was complete. We will not destroy their data. We will correct it. We will reinsert our history, not as a virus, but as an undeniable, unerasable part of their own. Every schoolchild who logs on to write a report, every historian researching the Accord of Serenity, every politician referencing a legal precedent will find us. They will find Earth. They will learn our names, see our faces, hear our screams. We will become a permanent part of their reality. We will become the ghost in their machine. Forever." The audacity of the plan silenced Yorick's. It was a masterstroke, a piece of psychological warfare that would make the Xylos incursion look like a childish prank. Lena looked up, a spark of her old fire returning to her eyes. "Give them back their memory," she whispered, "all of it." As they began their journey toward the galactic core, Inquisitor Kalen's hunt was already bearing fruit. She did not use brute force. She used logic. The mimetic weapon was precise, requiring immense processing power and a deep understanding of Xylan neurology. It was not the work of pirates or rebels. It was the work of specialists. She cross-referenced every known Xylan neuroscientist and historian who had ever expressed dissenting views. One name was flagged: Jorix, a mid-level archivist who had vanished a year ago after accessing restricted files pertaining to Quarantine Zone 734, the official designation for the Sol system. Kalen's analysts backtraced Yorick's digital ghost, finding the faint, encrypted trails of his escape. They found a pattern, a path leading from Xylos outward toward the lawless region of space known as the Whispering Chasm. a graveyard of failed stars and rogue asteroids known for its sensor-baffling nebulae. "He is hiding his trail," Kaelin observed to her tactical AI. "He is using the chasm's interference to mask his approach to his next target. An emotional attack is followed by, what a logical one. He will target our information infrastructure. Plot all high-value data hubs within a 3-week transit radius of the chasm's exit point." The AI processed the request. A dozen potential targets lit up on the star map. One pulsed brighter than the others. "Viridia," Kaelin said, a thin, cruel smile touching her lips for the first time. "Of course." The historian wants to rewrite the history books. How poetic. How predictable. She dispatched her fleet, 3 Purifier wings, led by her flagship, the Silent Resolve, moved to intercept, not by chasing the Minamazan through the chasm, but by cutting it off at its destination. She would let the ghosts slip through their graveyard, only to find judgment waiting for them on the other side. Unaware they were now the hunted, the crew of the Minamazani navigated the treacherous currents of the Whispering Chasm. The small ship was tossed by gravitational distortions, its hull groaning under the strain. Outside, the swirling gases of the nebulae looked like tormented spirits, their colors shifting from angry crimson to mournful indigo. It was a fitting landscape for their journey. The isolation and the lingering psychic trauma from Xylos began to wear on them. Yorick grew more withdrawn, spending his time running simulations of the Viridia infiltration, his focus a desperate attempt to outrun his guilt. Lena practiced meditation, trying to build psychic walls to keep the ghosts at bay. But she would still sometimes call out names in her sleep names from the Geneva bunker's manifest. Even Elias seemed changed. The cold certainty in his eyes was still there, but it was now laced with a deep weariness. The look of a man who had been fighting a war for longer than he had been alive. He spent hours in the ship's small digital archive, looking at images of Earth as it was, a vibrant blue-green jewel. He wasn't just avenging its death, he was mourning its life. "We are almost through," Yorick announced one day, his voice flat. "The Viridia system is 5 hours ahead." As they emerged from the swirling chaos of the chasm, the sight that greeted them was one of breathtaking, terrifying order. Viridia hung in the blackness, not as a moon, but as a perfect sphere of polished silver and glowing light, a man-made star of pure information. A web of transport ships and defense platforms orbited it in precise, geometric patterns. It was the embodiment of the stewardship's power, vast, beautiful, and utterly impregnable. "No fleet," Lena observed, her voice tight with suspicion. "The sector patrols are running their standard routes. It's too quiet." "They're not expecting us," Yorick said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. But Elias knew better. He had lived his life expecting the worst, and it had kept him alive. "Silas," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "Full spectrum passive scan. I want to know every ship, every energy signature, every whisper of data in this system. Assume we have walked into a trap." Silas's optical sensors pulsed with a soft red light. Data scrolled across the main view screen at an impossible speed. For a moment, there was nothing, and then a single, terrifying symbol appeared, hidden behind the energy signature of a civilian freighter. It was the emblem of the Office of Ideological Hygiene, a stylized, silent flame. "They're here," Brenner said, his voice a whisper. "They're waiting." On the bridge of the Silent Resolve, Inquisitor Kalen watched the small, dark shape of the Mnemosyne appear on her tactical display. "The anomaly is acquired," she said, her voice laced with the cold satisfaction of a scientist who has just proven a hypothesis. "They have taken the bait. Do not engage. Let them begin their infiltration. I want to capture their methods, analyze their technology, and then, when they believe they have succeeded, we will spring the trap. We will not just destroy them. We will dissect them, and we will learn how to build a better memory, a better truth." As the Mnemosyne began its silent, perilous approach toward the archive moon, Elias Vance looked at the faces of his crew. The guilt-ridden historian, the haunted psychic, the silent machine. They were 4 broken pieces of a dead world about to strike at the heart of an empire. And for the first time, he felt a sliver of doubt, not in their mission, but in their survival. They had come to haunt the galaxy, but now the galaxy was beginning to haunt them back. The approach to Viridia was like a moth flying towards a sun, a suicidal pilgrimage into the heart of the stewardship's power. The Mnemosyne, for all its stealth and cunning, was a splinter of driftwood floating towards a leviathan. Silas, a silent phantom in the machine, was their only shield. He wove their ship through the intricate dance of Viridia's orbital traffic, masking their energy signature within the wake of a lumbering freight hauler, piggybacking their communication signals on the chatter of a diplomatic courier. To the archive's automated defenses, they were nothing. A ghost in the static. On the bridge, the tension was a physical presence. Jorik's 3-fingered hands were slick with sweat as he monitored the proximity alerts, his large black eyes darting between a dozen different sensor feeds. Every ping of a passing patrol, every standard verification request from orbital control was a thunderclap in the suffocating silence. 30,000 kilometers to the injection point, Jorik whispered, his voice barely audible. "The Northern Polar Maintenance Conduit. It's an old system, predating the quantum firewalls. According to the schematics I found, it should be shielded from internal scans." Elias stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the shimmering silver sphere that filled the viewport. He trusted Silas's skill and Jorik's research, but he also trusted his own finely honed paranoia. "Kalen knows we're here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She's not a fool. This silence isn't a gift, it's a cage. She's letting us in." Lena, who had been in a deep trance, her consciousness stretched thin as she skimmed the psychic ether of the system, suddenly gasped. Her eyes snapped open, wide with alarm. "She's not just waiting," Lena breathed, a hand pressed to her temple. "She's listening. Not with sensors, with minds. There are sentinels, purifiers with amplified psychic abilities, stationed at key data nodes throughout the archive. They're acting as living tripwires. They're waiting for me." A cold dread settled over the bridge. This was a weapon they hadn't anticipated. Kalen wasn't just hunting a ship, she was hunting a specific mind. "Can they detect you now?" Elias asked, his voice sharp. Lena shook her head, her expression strained. "No, I'm too shielded, too far out. But the moment I attempt the mimetic injection, the moment I touch the archive's core consciousness, they'll feel it. It will be like a flare in the darkness. They'll know exactly where we are." Elias's jaw tightened. The plan had been to have Silas open the door and for Lena to pour their history into the archive's heart, a swift, silent psychic blow. Now, that was impossible. The moment she acted, the trap would spring. Then we changed the plan, Elias said, his mind racing. We can't use a psychic flare. We need a psychic scalpel. Silas, once you're inside, can you isolate a single, small section of the archive? Something obscure. Something rarely accessed. Silas's head tilted, and a new set of data scrolled across the main screen. He highlighted a small, dusty corner of Viridia's vast digital library, the sub-archive for xenobotanical failures. Perfect, Elias murmured. No one has looked at the file on the extinct flora of Quadrant 9 in a century. It's forgotten. Lena, instead of a massive data dump, you will inject one single memory, one image, one feeling. Make it small, make it precise. A single drop of poison in the well. Lena closed her eyes, concentrating. What memory? The face of a child in the Geneva bunker. Elias said, his voice heavy. The moment before the ceiling collapsed. Not the terror, not the scream, just the look in her eyes. The quiet, heartbreaking understanding that the universe was about to end and no one was coming to help. We will plant that single, perfect seed of despair in the heart of their knowledge, and we will let it grow. The Mnemosyne reached the polar conduit, a section of the archive's hull, seamlessly smooth to the naked eye, irised open, revealing a dark, cavernous tunnel. With the silence of a prayer, their small ship slipped inside. The tunnel was a relic, filled with thick, obsolete power cables and the hum of ancient machinery. It was the archive's forgotten basement, a place of grime and shadows in a palace of light. Silas's consciousness detached from the ship, flowing like quicksilver through the conduit's data ports, a digital wraith seeking its prey. On the bridge of the Silent Resolve, Kaylin watched a schematic of Viridia, her expression one of patient superiority. They are inside, she noted calmly. They have entered through the maintenance conduit, as predicted. The psychic sentinels report no anomalous activity. The subject Petrova is either dormant or more disciplined than anticipated. Shall we seal the conduit? Inquisitor, her second-in-command asked. No, Kaylin replied, a flicker of intellectual curiosity in her eyes. Let the specimen proceed. I want to see what it does. I want to understand its pathology. Back on the Mnemosyne, hours crawled by. The silence was absolute. Lena was in a deep meditative state, her mind poised, ready. Yorick stared at the conduit walls, the shame of betraying his people warring with the necessity of his actions. Elias stood like a statue, waiting. Finally, a single, soft chime echoed through the bridge. I am in. Silas communicated, his voice a synthesized whisper in their minds. I have isolated the target file, a study of nutrient-resistant fungi on Xylos beta. It is a dormant file, unaccessed for 112 standard years. The path is open. Elias looked at Lena and simply nodded. Lena took a deep, shuddering breath and closed her eyes. She reached out with her mind, not with a shout, but with the delicate touch of a surgeon. She found the isolated file, a cold, sterile packet of forgotten data, and into its heart. She placed the memory. It was not a grand, epic tragedy. It was a small, perfect shard of sorrow, a young girl with dust on her face, her eyes wide, holding a broken doll, looking up at a cracking ceiling, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. It was a memory of innocence betrayed, of hope extinguished. And then it was done. Lena pulled her consciousness back, collapsing into her chair, gasping as if she had been holding her breath for a century. "It's done," she whispered. "The seed is planted." For a moment, nothing happened. On the bridge of the silent resolve, Kalen's brow furrowed slightly. "Report, Troy," she demanded. "No psychic event. Inquisitor." A sentinel reported telepathically. "No mimetic intrusion detected. All systems are green." Kalen was confused. Had they aborted? Was this some kind of feint? And then, a low-level alert chimed from the archive's central processing core. A technician looked at his console. Bewildered. "Inquisitor, we have a minor data corruption. It seems to be replicating." Kalen's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The corrupted file, the one on xenobotany, is cross-referencing itself with other files at an exponential rate. It's linking. The image of the fungus is being replaced by Inquisitor. I don't know what it is. It looks like a humanoid child. The memory wasn't a virus that destroyed. It was a virus that connected. The image of the girl, imbued with Lena's psychic grief, was acting like a rogue search term. It began attaching itself to any file that contained related emotional or contextual keywords: loss, shelter, children, hope, abandonment, silence. A report on the economic collapse of the Siren hegemony was suddenly illustrated with the girl's sorrowful face. A treatise on the architectural integrity of subterranean structures now contained a phantom echo of a bunker's final moments. A psychological study on hope as a social motivator was now inexplicably, heartbreakingly linked to the image of the broken doll. It was spreading. It was not overwriting data. It was tainting it, imbuing the cold, sterile facts of the stewardship with an unshakable, profound sadness. "Quarantine the affected sectors." Kalen snapped, her composure finally breaking. "Purge the corrupted files." But it was too late. The data wasn't corrupted. It was infected with empathy. The logical, ordered mind of the archive was beginning to feel. The technicians trying to purge the files found themselves hesitating, their hands freezing over their consoles, struck by a wave of irrational, crippling sorrow as they looked at the image. The archive's automated logic systems, designed to organize information, were now organizing grief, spreading it through the system with terrifying efficiency. The psychic sentinels, who had been listening for a shout, were now being driven mad by a whisper that was coming from everywhere at once. One of them began to weep uncontrollably. Another screamed, clutching his head as the memory of the girl became his own. The trap had been sprung, but not on the Mnemosyne. It had been sprung on Viridia itself. The archive was tearing itself apart from the inside out, drowning in a sea of second-hand sorrow. "She knows," Elias said grimly, watching the chaos unfold through Silas's eyes. "It's time to go." The silent resolve and its fleet were no longer waiting patiently. They were converging on the polar conduit, their weapon ports glowing with lethal energy. "They've sealed the exit," Yorick yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "We're trapped." "No," Elias said, a grim, defiant light in his eyes. "Silas, you are still connected to the archive's core systems, aren't you?" "Affirmative." The machine whispered in their minds. "Then don't just give them a memory," Elias commanded, his voice ringing with a terrible purpose. "Give them a voice. Activate every emergency broadcast system in this archive. Open every channel. and play them the sound. Silas did not need to ask what sound. He had it stored in his memory banks, a recording from the final moments of Earth's orbital defense network, a sound he knew intimately. As the Purifier fleet prepared to fire, every speaker, every comm unit, every emergency siren on Viridia and in every ship in the system erupted with a single, deafening, soul-shattering sound, the collective, unfiltered scream of a billion people dying at once. The sound was a physical force, a psychic battering ram. The pilots on Kalen's ships cried out, clutching their ears. Their concentration shattered. The psychic sentinels went catatonic. The technicians on Viridia collapsed. Even Kalen herself staggered back, her hand flying to her head, the perfect composure of her face cracking into a mask of horrified disbelief. In that moment of pure, weaponized chaos, the Mimosini shot out of the maintenance conduit. It did not flee. It flew straight towards the flagship. The silent resolve. It was a gnat attacking a dragon. "What are you doing?" Jorik screamed. Elias didn't answer. He was watching the view screen, his eyes locked on Kalen's flagship, as their tiny ship streaked past the bridge of the silent resolve. Just for a second, their viewports aligned, and in that second, Elias Vance, the archivist of a dead world, looked across the void and met the horrified, hate-filled gaze of Inquisitor Kalen, the guardian of a dying lie. There were no words, no communications. There was only a look, a promise from him, a vow of vengeance from her. Then they were gone, accelerating into the void, leaving behind an empire's heart not broken, but infected with a truth more painful than any lie, and a scream that would echo in their nightmares forever. The escape from Viridia was not a clean one. As the Mnemosyne burned away from the crippled archive, Kalen's fleet, momentarily stunned by the psychic onslaught, began to recover. Their response was immediate and merciless. Lances of pure energy, designed to sterilize planets, carved through the darkness, narrowly missing the fleeing vessel. The small ship bucked and screamed as stray plasma fire from a Purifier destroyer clipped its aft section, tearing a jagged wound in the hull and sending a shower of sparks through the bridge. Jorik wrestled with the controls, his knuckles white. Port engine is failing. Life support is flickering in the aft compartments. We can't outrun them. Elias. He yelled over the wail of alarms. Elias stood braced against the command console, his face a grim mask. The look he had shared with Kalen was seared into his mind, a declaration of a war that had now become deeply personal. "We don't outrun them," he grunted. "We lose them. Silas, I need a ghost." The machine's synthesized voice was calm amidst the chaos. "The Whispering Chasm is too far. However, there is approximate alternative, the ash belt of Tartarus, a debris field from a shattered star. Dense, unstable, uncharted." "They won't follow us in there," Jorik said, a note of desperation in his voice. "It's a ship killer." "Exactly," Elias replied. "Take us in." The Mnemosyne veered sharply, diving towards a chaotic, swirling cloud of rock and crystalline dust that shimmered with residual stellar radiation. It was the galactic equivalent of a razor-filled storm, a place where nav computers failed and hulls were shredded to confetti. Behind them, the Silent Resolve and its escorts slowed at the edge of the debris field, their perfect formations breaking. On Kalen's bridge, a tactical officer reported, "Inquisitor, the target has entered the Tartarus ash belt. Pursuit is inadvisable. Standard protocol dictates we cordon the area and wait for them to be destroyed or forced out." Kaylin stared into the swirling chaos, her face a mask of cold fury. The echoes of the death scream still rang in her ears, a violation she could not forgive. "Protocol is for predictable enemies," she hissed. "This is a contagion. It does not follow rules. It adapts. It survives. Deploy the Seekers, and I want a full psychological and genealogical workup on the name Elias Vance. Find every ancestor, every teacher, every associate. I want to know what created him. I want to know how to unmake him." While the larger ships held their position, a dozen sleek, needle-nosed drone ships detached from the fleet and plunged into the ash belt. They were the Seekers, semi-sentient hunters designed for impossible environments. Their hulls plated with adaptive armor, their sensors capable of tracking a ship by its quantum shadow. The hunt had begun in earnest. Inside the ash belt, the Minamazin was in hell. Asteroids the size of mountains tumbled past the viewport, their jagged edges close enough to touch. The ship's hull groaned under a constant barrage of micrometeoroids that struck like a rain of bullets. The failing port engine caused the ship to list, making Jorik's piloting a constant, desperate fight against a death spiral. In the engine room, a space barely large enough for one person, Silas was a blur of motion. His metallic limbs moved with impossible speed, rerouting power conduits, patching microfractures in the plasma containment field, his optical sensors glowing with the intense light of a welder's torch. He was no longer just the ship's ghost. He was its frantic, desperate soul, holding it together with sheer force of will. On the bridge, Lena had collapsed. The psychic backlash from the death scream and the stress of the escape finally overwhelming her. She was feverish, muttering fragments of dying words from a dozen different languages, her mind a chaotic tempest of the ghosts she had weaponized. Elias knelt beside her, placing a damp cloth on her forehead, his scarred face etched with a concern that went deeper than their mission. She was not just a tool to him. She was one of the last of his people, a keeper of their shared, painful flame. "The Seekers are closing," Yorick reported, his voice tight. "They're networked, learning our flight path, predicting our movements." "Then we stop moving," Elias said, his gaze falling upon a massive, pockmarked asteroid drifting slowly ahead. It was a dead rock, half hollowed out by millennia of impacts, its surface a maze of canyons and craters. "Take us down there. Land us in the deepest canyon you can find and kill everything. Every system, every light. We go silent." It was a desperate gamble. Landing the damaged ship on the unstable surface was almost as dangerous as facing the Seekers. But it was their only chance. With agonizing slowness, Yorick guided the Nemazini into a deep, shadowy fissure on the asteroid's surface, the ship's landing gear scraping against the rock with a horrific screech. The moment they were settled, Elias gave the order. Full shutdown. The lights on the bridge died. The hum of the life support faded to a whisper. The active sensor arrays went dark. They were now just another piece of cold, dead rock in a field of a billion others. Their only hope that the Seekers' sophisticated sensors would overlook a target that had simply ceased to exist. For days, they waited in the cold and the dark. The only light came from the faint, eerie glow of the nebula outside, filtering down into their canyon. They rationed their emergency oxygen, ate cold nutrient paste, and spoke in whispers as if the Seekers could hear them. Lena's fever broke, but she remained weak and withdrawn, the psychic wounds deeper than any physical injury. Jorik, stripped of his duties as a pilot, became restless, pacing the confines of the small bridge like a caged animal. Elias, however, seemed to find a strange comfort in the silence and the darkness. It was a familiar environment, reminiscent of the bunkers of his childhood. He used the time to access the ship's private logs, rereading the last testaments of the seed ship captains, the men and women who had hurled their tiny arcs into the void, knowing they would never see them land. He was searching for something, not a strategy, but a reason, a reaffirmation of their purpose in the face of Kylan's relentless pursuit. Meanwhile, Kaylin was learning. Her researchers, working with the fragmented data recovered from Viridia, began to piece together a profile of Elias Vance. They unearthed records of his birth in the final years of the Geneva Accords, his parents both scientists on the Project Chimera seed ship program. They found his psychological evaluations from the early days of the Exodus high intelligence, extreme resilience, a profound sense of justice warped by trauma. But one detail stood out: a classified addendum to the Project Chimera files. It was a mention of a failsafe, a hidden protocol known only as Lethe. The details were encrypted beyond even Kalen's ability to crack, but its purpose was clear. It was a weapon of last resort, a ghost in the Earthborn machine, designed by the first generation of survivors. "This is not random vengeance," Kalen mused, studying the profile. "This is a plan, orchestrated by the dead. Vance is not the author of this war. He is merely its final instrument. Find out what Lethe is. Find it, and we find his endgame." Back in the Ash Belt, the Seekers were becoming a problem. Their search patterns were growing tighter, more systematic. One of them passed directly over their canyon, its searchlight cutting through the darkness, missing their ship by meters. They couldn't stay hidden forever. "We're out of time," Elias said, his voice a low whisper in the dark. "They'll find us in another cycle. We need to fight back." "Fight with what?" Jorik hissed. "Our main weapon systems are offline. We have one functioning engine and a hull held together with Silas's good intentions." "We won't use our weapons," Elias said, a cold, calculating gleam in his eyes. "We'll use theirs." He turned to the silent form of Silas. "You can still communicate with the ship's systems. Can't you subvocally affirmative?" Silas's voice echoed in their minds. "The Seekers are networked, a single, unified consciousness. If you can touch one, you can touch them all." "Lena, are you strong enough?" Lena Rissa, who had been listening from her chair, sat up straighter. The weakness was still there, but a flicker of resolve had returned to her eyes. "I can try. What's the plan?" The plan was another desperate gambit, a fusion of human cunning, Xylan knowledge, and machine logic. Jorik would use the last of their engine power to create a brief, focused energy spike, a ping designed to attract a single seeker. As it came to investigate, Silas would use a tight beam laser to carve a single, as complex algorithm into its hull, a viral code disguised as random scorch marks. When the seeker reconnected to its hive mind to report the anomaly, the virus would upload, and Lena, at that exact moment, would push a single, targeted psychic command through the newly opened back door. "You are not hunters. You are prey." The execution was flawless. Jorik's energy ping worked like a lure. A lone seeker detached from the search grid and descended into their canyon. As it hovered over them, its sensors scanning their dead ship. A beam of intense light shot out from the Minimozini, etching a complex, swirling pattern onto the drone's silver skin. The seeker, registering the attack, pulled back and re-established its connection with the hive mind. And the trap was sprung. The viral code flooded the network, and Lena's psychic command followed, a poison arrow into the heart of the machine consciousness. Across the ash belt, the other 11 seekers suddenly stopped their systematic search. Their programming, which for cycles had defined them as predators, was suddenly inverted. They were now consumed by a single, overriding directive: hunt the hunter. The 12 seekers turned on each other. The silent, graceful hunters became a pack of rabid dogs, tearing each other apart with their own plasma cutters and kinetic drills. The ash belt, which had been silent for so long, was now filled with the light of their fratricidal battle. On the bridge of the Mnemosyone, the crew watched in stunned silence. Yorick stared at the tactical display, his mouth agape. By the stars, he breathed. It worked. Elias allowed himself a grim, fleeting smile. "We can't outrun her," he said. "We can't outfight her, so we have to outthink her." He looked at his crew, seeing the exhaustion and the fear, but also the renewed sense of purpose. "Get the engines online. Jorik, Silas, I need a full damage report. Lena, rest. The war is far from over." As the Mnemosyne limped out of the ash belt, leaving the wreckage of Kalen's hunters behind, a new, cold resolve had settled over its crew. They had survived. They had proven they were more than just ghosts. They were insurgents, capable of turning the Empire's weapons against itself. But, on the silent resolve, Kalen was not defeated. She was intrigued. "They are resourceful," she said, watching the last of her seekers self-destruct. They turned a logical system against itself using an emotional directive, a fascinating synthesis of tactics. She turned her attention back to the encrypted Lethe protocol. The loss of her seekers was an acceptable price for this new insight. She was beginning to understand how Elias Vance thought, and she now knew that to defeat him, she couldn't just hunt his ship. She had to hunt his hope. "Set a course for the outer rim," she commanded, her voice dangerously calm, "to the coordinates of the old seed ship colonies, the ones that went dark, the ones the stewardship wrote off as failures. If Vance is fighting for the future of humanity, then it's time we showed him that humanity has no future." The journey to the outer rim was a pilgrimage through a graveyard of forgotten hopes. The Tartarus ash belt had taken its toll on the Mnemosyne. The ship was a patchwork of repairs, its systems fragile, its reserves of energy and nutrients dangerously low. They limped through the void, a wounded animal seeking refuge. Their destination was a whisper in the star charts, a system designated only as Kepler 186 Fus, one of the original destinations for the Project Chimera seed ships. It was a place Elias's parents had spoken of in the final days. A last, desperate gamble on a world that might, just might, be another Earth. For Elias, it was more than a tactical retreat. It was a search for a ghost of a different kind, the ghost of a future. He needed to know if any of them had made it. He needed to know if they were fighting for the memory of a dead species or for the survival of a living one. As they traveled, the psychological toll of their war began to manifest in new, unsettling ways. Jorik, the Xelon defector, found himself obsessively studying Earth's history, not its wars, but its art, its poetry, its philosophies. He was trying to understand the soul of the people he had doomed his own to remember. And in doing so, he became more human than he had ever been Xylan, a man caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. Lena's psychic wounds had scarred over, but the scars were tender. She could no longer sleep without the low, thrumming hum of the ship's engine to act as a psychic shield. The silence of the void was too loud, too full of the echoes of the dead. She spent her time tending to the ship's small hydroponics bay, a tiny patch of green in a world of gray steel, nurturing life as a penance for the death she had dealt. And Elias grew quieter, more withdrawn. He would spend long cycles staring at the star map, his mind not on Kalen or the stewardship, but on the impossible distance between stars, on the crushing loneliness of their cause. He was the archivist, the keeper of their story, but he was beginning to fear he would be its final word. Their arrival at Kepler 186f was met not with a thriving colony or a silent ruin, but with something far stranger. The planet was alive, its continents a patchwork of angry red vegetation under the light of its dim, red dwarf star. But there were no cities, no communication signals, no signs of the advanced civilization the seed ship was meant to build. There was only one thing, a single, massive, black tower at the planet's north pole, a structure so vast it pierced the thin atmosphere, its purpose and origin a complete mystery. "It's not ours," Elias said, his voice a low whisper as he stared at the view screen. The seed ship's log said they were targeting the equatorial continent. This is something else. As they drew closer, a signal, weak and heavily degraded, reached them. It wasn't a standard communication frequency. It was a biosignature, a psychic call. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her head. "It's human," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. "But it's wrong. It's loud and hungry." Ignoring every instinct for self-preservation, Elias ordered Orcs to take them down. They landed the battered Namazan in the shadow of the colossal tower. The air outside was thin but breathable, tasting of metal and strange, bitter pollen from the red foliage. As they stepped out onto the alien soil, clad in environmental suits, the psychic pressure intensified. It was a feeling of being watched, of being assessed by a vast alien intelligence that wore a human mask. As they approached the base of the tower, a section of the seamless black wall dissolved, revealing an entrance. The psychic call pulled them forward. Inside, they found a nightmare. The tower was a biological machine. Its walls pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone and blood. In the center of a vast chamber, suspended in a web of living, fleshy cables, were the descendants of the Project Chimera colonists. They were no longer truly human. Their bodies were elongated, pale, their limbs atrophied, their skulls enlarged to accommodate massive, bulging brains. They were a telepathic choir, a collective consciousness that had abandoned individuality for a shared, monstrous existence. This was the Lethe Protocol. Elias, seeing the twisted forms, finally understood the terrible truth his parents had hidden. Lethe wasn't a weapon. It was a perversion of their mission. Faced with the failure of their technology on this harsh new world, the original colonists had turned to their last resort, forced, accelerated evolution. They had used their genetic technology not to adapt to the world, but to become it. The tower was their body. The planet was their farm. And their collective mind, the choir as it called itself, was their god. You have come. The choir's voice echoed directly in their minds, a cacophony of 1,000 thoughts speaking as one. The memory keepers, the last of the broken ones. What have you done? Elias asked, his voice shaking with horror and grief. We have survived, the choir replied, its voice devoid of emotion. Individuality is a flaw, a path to conflict and self-destruction. It is what killed the old world. We have corrected it. We are humanity perfected, unified, eternal. You're a cancer, Lena spat, her mind reeling from the psychic force of the choir. You've abandoned everything that made us human. We have abandoned pain, the choir corrected. We have abandoned fear. We offer you the same. Join us. Add your memories to our own. We will give you peace. It was a horrifying, seductive offer. An end to the struggle, to the pain, to the crushing weight of their mission. For a moment, Yorick, the lost and lonely Xylan, almost considered it. He saw a vision of belonging, of being part of a greater whole. But then he looked at Elias's face, at the profound, heartbreaking agony of a son seeing his parents' dream twisted into a monstrosity. And the moment passed. Before Elias could refuse, a proximity alarm shrieked through their suit communicators. Yorick's voice was a panicked yell. Elias, it's Kaylin. She's in orbit. Kaylin had not just followed them, she had anticipated them. The discovery of the Lethe Protocol had led her here, to this final, terrible secret of the Earthborn. Her fleet, led by the Silent Resolve, now hung in the sky above the red planet, a ring of cold, silver judgment. And she was not alone. With her were ships from a dozen other stewardship species, brought here to witness the truth about humanity. On the bridge of her flagship, Kaylin opened a channel, broadcasting to the entire system, and to the tormented crew on the surface below. Behold the future of humanity. Her voice boomed, cold and triumphant. Not noble survivors, not tragic victims. They are a plague, a self-consuming monstrosity that perverts the very nature of life. They did not come to share their memory. They came to spread their disease. They must be sterilized for the good of the galaxy. It was her masterstroke. She had not come to destroy Elias. She had come to discredit him, to hold up this living nightmare as the inevitable endgame of all humanity, to justify their original abandonment and their final, complete erasure. The choir in the tower reacted not with fear, but with rage. The others are here. Its voice shrieked in their minds. They will not cleanse us. We will consume them. The black tower began to thrum with immense power. The psychic pressure increased 1,000-fold, and on the planet's surface, the red vegetation began to writhe, twisting into sharp, spear-like tendrils. The choir was not just a mind, it was a planetary weapon. But as it prepared to strike, Elias Vance made his final choice. He was not just the archivist of the past, he was the guardian of the future, and he would not let humanity's final legacy be either a memory of a victim or the reality of a monster. Lena, he commanded, his voice ringing with a desperate, final authority. The death scream. You still have it, don't you? Lena nodded, her face pale. Give it to them, Elias said, looking at the monstrous, pulsating forms of his distant cousins. All of it. Show them what they have forgotten. Show them the price of their peace. It will destroy them, Lena cried. Their minds are all connected. No, Elias said, his eyes filled with a terrible, sorrowful light. It will remind them. Lena closed her eyes and unleashed the psychic weapon one last time. She did not aim it at Kalen's fleet, but at the heart of the choir. The collective scream of 1 billion dying individuals flooded the hive mind. And in that moment, the choir remembered. It remembered individuality. It remembered love and loss and a child's face in a bunker and the taste of ash. The unified consciousness shattered into 1 billion points of agonizing, individual grief. The psychic scream of the choir was a wave of pure despair that lashed out into space. The crews on Kalen's fleet were overwhelmed. The telepathic species reeled in agony. The non-telepaths were struck with a wave of crippling, unreasoning terror. The perfect, unified fleet fell into chaos. The tower on the planet began to crumble, its biological systems failing as its guiding consciousness dissolved into madness. Elias, Lena. And Yorick ran, scrambling back to the Mnemosyne as the ground shook and the sky filled with the psychic fallout of a soul's death. They lifted off, their small, broken ship rising into a sky filled with a disoriented, panicked fleet. They had one last, desperate card to play. Silas, the silent ghost, had been busy. While the psychic battle raged, he had done what he did best. He had found a back door. He had infiltrated the comm system of the Silent Resolve. And as they ascended, Elias Vance's face appeared on every view screen in Kalen's fleet, on every ship that had come to witness humanity's damnation. He was not scarred and vengeful now. He was weary, his face lined with sorrow. You came to see the end of humanity, he said, his voice quiet but carrying over the chaos. And you have. We are a broken people. We have become ghosts and monsters. We have done unforgivable things to you and to ourselves. But we are this way because you left us alone in the dark. Look at what your silence created. He gestured to the crumbling tower, to the panicked fleet. This is the fruit of your stability. This is the peace you chose. And it will not end with us. Today, it was our ghosts. Tomorrow, it will be your own. He cut the transmission. The Mnemosyne did not flee. It simply turned and moved towards the system's jump point, slow and deliberate. No one fired. No one tried to stop them. They had seen too much. They had heard too much. The moral certainty that had been the bedrock of the stewardship was cracked beyond repair. Kalen watched them go, her face a mask of stone, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something she had never felt before, doubt. She had won the battle. Humanity's last colony was dying. Its last insurgents were fleeing, but she had lost the war for the truth. The story of Earth was no longer just a footnote. It was now a cautionary tale, a galactic myth, a ghost that would haunt the sterile corridors of the stewardship for generations. On the bridge of the Mnemosyne, as they prepared to jump into the unknown, Jorik looked at Elias. "Where do we go now?" he asked. Elias Vance, the last archivist, looked out at the star-dusted void. They had no home. They had no people. They had only a story. "We go on," he said, his voice filled with the quiet, stubborn resilience of a species that had died 1,000 times and still refused to be forgotten. We find the others, and we continue to remember.